Here's Mr. Fleischman here. He's our unit historian, and he's going to talk about the history of this airplane right here.
I'm the historian, and I know a little bit where some of the bodies are buried on these airplanes. And I thought I'd go back to the very beginning. As you probably figured out, the Grumman people, when they make a fighter, their little trick is you name it after a cat. Wildcat, Hellcats, Tiger Cats, Bearcats. And I wanted to see what a Bearcat looks like. There actually is a Bearcat. It's a little thing that lives in Southeast Asia. And I think if the Grumman people would have looked at the picture of this thing, they would have never named the airplane after it. It's a little bitty weaselly thing with a long nose, and so why they decided on Bearcat, they must have been short on names on this airplane. This airplane, as we've been hearing, was built right at the end, after World War II. It was a 1949 airplane. Probably started it in 48. First flight was in March, 10th of March. And then the Navy took over it a little bit over a month later, 7 April of 1949. They apparently had it for 10 years, till 1958. And then it was surplused, and it went through, we're not the first owner. We are like the 7th owner of the airplane. And the interesting thing is they're all out here from California, except for 2 people. So a fellow from Los Angeles, Ed Weiner, owned it. Leo Demars, Hamilton Aircraft, Larry Hamilton from Sonoma. A fellow from Newport Beach, Richard Tobey. Paul Feinfrock from Hobart, Oklahoma, the first non-Californian. And then Gary Levitz. If the name Levitz sounds familiar, it's Levitz Furniture. He was an air race pilot. That's where he got his money. And that's where the connection with the Commemorative Air Force starts. And he bought it and then sold it to Lloyd Nolan. Lloyd, as you know, was the founding father of the Commemorative Air Force, then called the Confederate Air Force. So from 72 to about 2008, it belonged to the Confederate and then the Commemorative Air Force. It's been bellied in once. It's been kind of landed and flipped over once. And the accident report on this is interesting because they say damage was substantial. It's a local flight to Harlingen, Texas. The engine failed or malfunctioned while cruising. The aircraft nosed over during the landing rollout. This was the complete power loss in the failure of one engine. It only has one engine. That's FAA details. The emergency circumstances included a forced off-airport landing on land, and the remarks include this very cryptic thing: fuel tank found empty, no evidence of spillage. So, did he run out of gas? Probably not. We're talking about the situation with the neoprene rubber in the fuel tanks. If you have a tank that says you're full, and suddenly your tank is like this and your gauge is still saying your fuel, somewhere along the line there's a difference in fuel. It went to Chino. There were a little bit of politics involved, so we were told. It went to Chino because that's where all the air race guys were. And they proceeded to take the airplane and take it apart so you couldn't fly it back to Texas if they wanted it. Steve got involved with the airplane. We brought it up here. Lefty Gardner came up. So we had the airplane, worked on it for a year. Lefty flew it after the first test flight, and a lot of us remember Joe Pepito, who was our chief of maintenance. And Joe ran up to Lefty and said, how's it fly? And he says, it flies perfect. Don't change a thing. And from the talk to the pilots, they still think it flies perfect. We've had it for air shows. Steve probably had second thoughts a few years back around Burbank when we had an engine problem with it. He had a ditch taken into Burbank, and we got it back. And we have it, and it flies just fine. There's not too much history on the thing as far as pictures. We did have a picture of the airplane taking off of the Carl Vinson. The markings on this airplane, the first markings were blue with a big A on the tail. That was based on carrier markings off the Antietam. These markings are off the Shangri-La, and marked that way because Ken Kramer, who was the first crew chief on the airplane, when he was in the service, was crew chief, or plane captains as the Navy refers to them, on one of these. And so we marked it up in the markings of his carrier. And the joke used to be, when Ken was here, Ken, what did you do 30 years ago? And he said, I was crew chief on a Bearcat. You haven't progressed much, have you? Still crew chief on a Bearcat. These are about the only markings the airplanes have had, other than just stripped down to bare metal, and the big A on the tail for the Antietam, and now the S for the Shangri-La. And that is, thankfully, a very short but very colorful history of this airplane. It's here, it flies good, and we love it. Thank you.